New York Public Programs for the Aspen Institute, and I am very pleased to welcome you to another Aspen Institute event at Roosevelt House, the Public Policy Institute of Hunter College and the historic home of Sarah and Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. And a special thanks to Jennifer Rabb and her wonderful staff for hosting Aspen in New York for the programs that we do here, like the one you're going to be a part of tonight. Tonight's program is part of a very special Aspen series called Conversations with Great Leaders in memory of Preston Robert Tisch. It features discussions with leaders who are making a difference in their communities through the way they look at their work and their role in helping to build a civil society. These leaders very much represent the values and commitments to public good of the person that this series is named after, Preston Robert Tisch. His family, Steve, Lori, Lizzie, and Jonathan Tisch, as well as the Lori M. Tisch Illumination Fund, have generously made it possible for the Institute to bring to you the wisdom and insights of leaders like the person you're going to be listening to tonight. Ray Kelly is a 43-year veteran of the New York Police Department and served in 25 different commands before being named police commissioner in January 2002 by Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He's the longest-serving police commissioner in the city's history, as well as the first to hold the post for a second separate tenure. He served under Mayor David Dinkins from 1992 to 94. His accomplishments are many, as you can see in the program, and you'll hear more about tonight. He created the first counterterrorism bureau of any municipal police department in the country. He served as Undersecretary for Enforcement at the U.S. Treasury Department, where he supervised the department's enforcement bureaus, including U.S. Customs, the U.S. Secret Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. He's also served on the Executive Committee and was elected Vice President for the Americas of Interpol, the International Police Organization. And he is currently President of Risk Management Services at Cushman & Wakefield, as well as a contributor to ABC News. Our moderator tonight is also equally impressive. Richard Falkenrath is Shelby Cullum and Catherine W. Davis Adjunct Senior Fellow for Counterterrorism and Homeland Security at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is also a contributing editor to Bloomberg TV. So as you can see, we're in for a very interesting and provocative discussion. And now I will turn it over to Rich to let that discussion begin.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. For me personally, it's a real privilege to be here tonight, and in particular to be the moderator or interviewer for my former boss. And I worked for Commissioner Kelly for 4 years as Deputy Commissioner of Counterterrorism at the NYPD. It was the greatest job I ever had, and he was the greatest boss I ever had. So I'm somewhat biased, and it will be very difficult for me not to just serve softball after softball. But the focus of this series is leadership. It's not the policy or current issues or current affairs, national security. It's really on leadership. And there's, I think, almost no one better to talk about that than Ray Kelly, who's been a leader his entire career, which, by the way, is longer than I've been alive. And someone who I really revere. I just had to get it in there because it is so impressive. It is so impressive for someone to have spent so long, 5 decades in public life, in leadership positions, and so many different for it. And it's something that I've held in awe. And I wanted to ask you, Commissioner Kelly, for the benefit of for the audience tonight, thinking about your career and your role. How is it that you began this path that you succeeded so spectacularly in public safety and policing? I mean, what was it that drove you a young man in growing up in Manhattan, I believe, to join the NYPD, the organization that you would ultimately lead twice.
Well, it is great to be here. Thank you. I'm just concerned about how Richard exhibits his objectivity, and his independence, But I wish I had a real romantic story about joining the police department, something I always wanted to do. That's not the case. I was born on the west side of Manhattan, certainly working class family, working class parents. My mother worked in Macy's as a checker, part-time, when you had 5 garments and you went and tried them on, they give you a little 5 slip. And so I needed a job, part-time job. When I was in high school, my mother got me a job in Macy's to, be what they used to call a stock boy when that was politically acceptable to have a job with boy in the title. So what happened is I was going to Manhattan College in the Bronx, traveling on the subway. Going to work, I saw an ad for a police cadet program, which was the first of its kind. If you remember, Adam Walensky was an advisor to President Kennedy. One of the proposals that was floating out there is an effort to get college graduates into policing. And to do that, you would start sort of in an apprenticeship program, cadet program, and you would, sort of like a velvet glove, start and then join a police department and then, continue on. Well, that's what I did. But it got a little bit sidetracked because I had 3 older brothers in the Marine Corps, and I sort of had no choice but to go in the Marine Corps as a result. So I was a police cadet on the side, going to college, and I joined the Officer Candidate Program for the Marine Corps. I got commissioned as a second lieutenant when I graduated, but as a result of belonging to the cadet program, I had to go through all of the hoops to become a police officer. I became a police officer before I went on active duty. I was a police officer for 5 days. I then went in the Marine Corps and on active duty for a little over 3 years, and went to Vietnam during that time. But I came back and wanted to go to law school. And I thinking about this and said, gee, the police department has scholarships, and maybe I can do it through the police department. So that's what I did. I didn't get a police department scholarship because I had the GI Bill. I came back. Our baby, our son, James, was born when I was in Vietnam. So I didn't see him until he was 5 months old. I needed a job. I didn't have this burning desire to be a police officer, but I needed the job. Wanted to go to law school. Came to the police department, went to law school, but really fell in love with policing. It was exciting. It was a different time in the history of the city. There was a lot of crime. This is late 60s, early 70s, and I found that to be very exhilarating. I mean, yes, you could do some good things, but it was very, very exciting, and I just loved it, and I really haven't had a bad day in the police department.
Commissioner, let me ask you about your time in the Marine Corps, a tough time. I mean, our nation was at war in Southeast Asia. You were there. My sense is, having worked for you, is that was a very formative experience for you. You always struck me as someone who wasn't just a police commander, but also a Marine. What did you learn in the Marine Corps about leadership? I mean, you had to command men under fire, in combat. Tell us about those lessons and how they applied later.
Yeah, I've said when I'm asked this question that virtually everything I learned about leadership at an early age I learned through the Marine Corps. I think the services in general have a very effective way of teaching things to the masses. And one of the things that struck me early on was, well, the issue, how do you become a leader? I mean, here you are, you're a young person, you're placed into a position of responsibility. You have 40 enlisted men looking up to you for leadership as a lieutenant. So it was always, I think, an issue that not only in my mind, but other young officers as well. One of the things that I latched onto was the leadership traits that was in a green book called Guidebook for Marines. And I still have the 14 leadership traits in my little schedule. I look at it virtually every day. I mean, I don't necessarily read it every day, but I see it every day. I pretty much internalized them. And It's 14 principles, and in essence, what it says is, if you want to be a leader, if you look like a leader, if you sound like a leader, if you do things like a leader, you're a leader. It's like, if it looks like a duck and sounds like it's a duck. So that's where the traits come in. And the first trait is integrity. You have to be honest with yourself, honest with others, dependability, decisiveness, judgment, justice, which is, a sense of fairness, tact, initiative, enthusiasm, endurance, bearing, unselfishness, courage, job knowledge, and all of these things have little stories and anecdotes associated with it. But it sort of hit me early on, and I used it, and I stayed with it. And obviously, you do learn a lot. You learn a lot in combat situations. I was very impressed with the quality of leaders that I saw. My peers, other lieutenants, and certainly, the Marine Corps is at least and still, a very spirited, I think, professional organization. And I was very much impressed with the leaders and their ability to communicate and teach those leadership principles.
And how we're going to talk about the NYPD a bit and this incredible transformation that it went through and that you really led. Back then, when you joined it, when you came back from Vietnam, and when you were rising up through the ranks, what was it like? What was the leadership model then? We'll talk about what it's like now, but it was a different department than basically everyone else knows about now.
And I'll tell you an example that shows you how different it was. I'm sorry, I wanted to turn this on. When I came back to the police department from Vietnam, and I had never been a recruit in the police academy, so they put me in a police academy class, and after maybe 4 days, they took us and gave us blue uniforms and guns, and took us to the firing range and fired 50 rounds of ammunition, and sent us out in the street with experienced police officers. So it was no training. This was incredible. Today, it couldn't happen in a million years. But there were these riots, disturbances going on in East New York and in the Bedford-Stuyvesant. And so the decision was that needed all hands. We don't care how much training they had. Put them out there. Put them out with an experienced police officer, and that's what they did. So I had, I'd been in Vietnam, but I came sort of like a new Vietnam because, cinder blocks were coming off the roof and bottles were being thrown, and these are other. I had been around the block a little bit. I had other people in my class were there 4 or 5 days, and this is what they experienced. So it's a different environment. It was the city had lots of problems, and the department, that was not a wise decision, to do that. But we've come a long way since then.
What was the executive ranks like in the police department at that time, before the great professionalization that's occurred now?
Well, obviously, they're all uniformed people, unlike what we have now. In other words, you were civil service up until the rank of captain, and then you were appointed above that. And that's the way it is now, but there were very few people from outside of police. Like now, we had, when I was there, Rich was a deputy commissioner, came in from outside the department. I had reporting to me were perhaps as many as 18 people. Now that's a big spread, but it's an organization that I knew well. It depends on, it's situational, so whether or not you have a lot of people reporting to you. So it was career police officers with no education, no requirement of education, and maybe an occasional criminal justice Baruch schools where the college was then. But it wasn't a requirement. It wasn't even thought of, and it was almost, seen as a detriment to it being. Well, you're not a real cop. You spent time in school, that sort of thing.
Now, the crack epidemic in the late.
Much of the crime problem in the 70s was driven by drugs, and much of that was heroin. Certainly, late 60s, early 70s, and we see obviously resurgence of heroin now. But, so as a result, they had a lot of property crimes. It was not unusual, certainly in East Harlem, where I was working, to see people overdosed and dead in hallways and all over the blocks and up on roofs. And there was just feeling of things being out of control. There was also a belief in City Hall and budget people that the police headcount number was a political number, that it wasn't something that would change. Crime was seen as a social problem that could not be impacted by police. So it makes no difference if you had 20,000 cops or 25,000 cops. It's just not going to matter. And that philosophy permeated government for quite a while. A couple of very forceful thinkers, budget directors, continued to push that notion. And a budget director is a very powerful person. We knew, certainly the mayor knew, the mayor-elect knew, that we had to do something more to protect the city. If you recall, I certainly do, I have the press clippings, there was a belief that another terrorist attack was inevitable, just a question of when, not if. Crime was going to go up. Don't forget, America's crime-fighting mayor was leaving, Rudy Giuliani. The police force shrunk because of the budget. The dot-com bubble burst about a year or so before that. So things were very bleak. But one thing I knew is that we had to supplement what the federal government was doing to protect the city. It's a tool. It is an action that has been authorized by the common law for really hundreds of years, authorized or validated, I should say, by a Supreme Court case, Terry versus Ohio in 1968, and authorized by statute throughout the country. So what does it say? In essence, it says that police officers who are brought in a public place have the right, if they see someone acting suspiciously, to stop that person and ask them what they're doing, or ask them what the circumstances are. Now, if they can articulate a fear for their own safety, they can do a limited pat-down. So that's where frisk is. Now, one of the problems is stop and frisk is a pretty pejorative term. It should have been relabeled a field interrogation or whatever, but it was skillfully marketed, you might say,